Good morning. My name is Frances Haugen, and some of you may know me as the Facebook whistleblower. Can you hear me? Are we good? Yeah. Good. You may know me as the Facebook whistleblower. In the fall of 2021, a large wave of reporting emanated from about 150 news outlets around the world. I had brought out 22,000 pages of documents for the SEC and Congress, and beginning with reporting in the Wall Street Journal and flowing on to an international consortium of other journalists, it was exposed that Facebook knew that choices it made to better its business had side effects that were incredibly costly for the rest of society. One of the reasons I'm so excited to speak with you guys today is that I believe that the investment community plays an incredible role in providing oversight for companies. Right now, Facebook has been exempted from that oversight because Mark Zuckerberg holds over 50% of all the voting shares. As a result of not having any accountability to his board, to the shareholders, or other external checks, a culture is formed inside of Facebook that is incredibly, it's become set. It's become fixed in its ways, because the way you get to be close to Mark is by telling Mark things he wants to hear. All of us, when we become disconnected from reality, when we no longer have feedback loops, we can begin to veer into our own kind of version of reality and away from the consensus reality. The cost of that has been incredibly costly. One of the major revelations I brought out is about something I call algorithmic escalation. The idea that when you have algorithms that are optimized for engagement, for getting people to click on things, for getting people to put comments on things, that process ends up biasing over time towards more and more extreme content. Documents in my disclosures said things like publishers had started noticing that the articles that drove the most traffic back to their site, like BuzzFeed, the CEO of BuzzFeed wrote to Facebook specifically saying, when we look at our traffic stats, some of the content we're most ashamed of is the content we get the most traffic back from. We think there's something wrong with your algorithm. Political parties on the left and the right in Europe said, hey, we know you changed the algorithm. This was back in 2018. We know you changed the algorithm. It used to be that we could share something that was important, but maybe not the most exciting, something like a white paper on our agricultural policy. And it's not like it got the most comments. We could see that, or the reshares. But we could see from looking at the stats that people spent time with it, people read it. Now we're forced into a really, really hard choice, which is we're social media managers. Our job is to get the positions of our party out there. But what we find is that the only thing that Facebook will distribute is content that's even, that we know our constituents aren't fond of. That these extreme positions, the things that can get the clicks, get the comments, that can rile up our anger, those are the ones that get the most distribution. And we're forced to choose between content that we know our constituents believe in and content that we know will get distributed. That's incredibly, incredibly problematic. You have a system that has no oversight, where a single man can step in and do basically anything he wants and have no accountability. I'll give you an example of a concrete application of this. In the fall of 2019, a few months after I started joining Facebook, I watched this unilateral action in power in a way that was incredibly frightening. So back in the spring of 2019, the BJP party in India had begun to use rhetoric that was incredibly inflammatory towards Muslims. They had started to compare Muslims to pests, rodents, insects, that kind of thing. And Facebook had on staff back then, many of them I'm pretty sure are fired now. They had many people on staff back then who were specialists at atrocity studies. Where do genocides come from? Where does ethnic violence come from? And one of the key first steps is when major political leaders, people like the head of a country, start describing their minorities in terms of being, pests. And so a war room was called, and people asked, they were like, that we need to be able to take down speech that could endanger people. And it went all the way up to Sheryl Sandberg, and they presented it. They presented all the academic context on this kind of thing, how these escalations happen. And they came to agreement that they needed to take down the speech from Modi. But Cheryl had to leave the room for 15 minutes. And while she left the room to go deal with something else, the conversation moved on. And someone pointed out that if they took down speech from Modi, when Trump inevitably compared, say, Mexican Americans to some form of insects, they would have to take down speech for him too. And so they took a step back. They said, let's do this more rigorously. Let's do this defensively. And they spent 3 months, 4 months, they spent all the way until September, actively tweaking, having 30 or 40 researchers, people with PhDs, people from the ads team, people from the operations team, people from policy, all across the Facebook, this consortium work together to come up with what should the political the violent speech policy be. And they brought it to Mark. Now think about this. Think of how many hours of effort from experts went into this. And Mark said, this won't do. I can write the political speech policy this weekend. And he went home and he spent the weekend and he wrote the policy and he came back. And on Monday or Tuesday, they announced, Facebook will not take down speech from politicians. And one, think about how problematic this is from a governance perspective. Like a single man can override conscientious, thoughtful work from people who know far more about the topic than him, just because he got lucky when he was 19. But second, it was so reckless, it didn't consult the ads team or the misinformation team. Politicians, as it's termed in the policy, were people who were elected. Guess what? Local dog catchers are sometimes elected. Is their speech politically protected? There was no way to actually enforce the policy because there are no comprehensive databases of all the elected officials in the world. There's no thing mapping those officials to their Facebook accounts. We had members of the third-party fact-checking program, the journalists who worked with Facebook to check misinformation, quit the program over it. Because when they didn't realize that this post that Facebook had put in their queue to check was actually ineligible to be fact-checked because it was from some low-level elected official in some state, maybe some town council member, and they got strikes for being bad fact-checkers as a result. They quit the program. This is a huge, huge problem. It is only going to get worse, and it's not just Facebook. These algorithms that are directing our attention, that are choosing what we focus on, don't exist just on Facebook. They exist on things like TikTok. And I think it's really important to take a step back and say, hey, what's the difference between Facebook and TikTok? So Facebook has run research that says, if you just respect the choices of people, so people say, I want to get content from these people, I want to get content from these pages, these groups. If you respect their choices and give that content preference, you get less violence, less hate speech, and less nudity for free. You don't have to censor anyone. You just get it for free because you're respecting people's choices. The real place where that violence, that hate speech, that extremism sneaks in is when Facebook decides, because your friend put a comment on something, now that content should go in your feed. That because someone invited you to a group that you had never heard of before, because they start putting content from that group in your feed for 30 days. And because you wrote a comment saying, this is misinformation, they said, ooh, you like this group, and they continued giving you content. Your family and your friends are not the problem. And we have solutions that don't involve preferencing certain ideas over others to make this safer. But all of those techniques begin to fail when we talk about TikTok. TikTok's big claim to fame is its algorithm, that it doesn't matter where the content comes from in the world, it doesn't matter if you've never heard of them before, they're going to give you the thing that you want the most. And one of the things that's a little heartening about it, at least, is it seems that TikTok has a much higher willingness to take responsibility for the idea that an algorithm is a product, that they're making conscientious choices. They intentionally emphasize more happy content because they know that it attracts more users. If you have two products, one makes people happy and one makes them sad, in general, in a capitalist society, the one that makes you happy wins. But at the same time, in a product that doesn't anchor itself in giving you content from people you know, you end up in a situation where you're even more vulnerable to the choices of those algorithm designers. Right now, we don't know why we see the videos we see. There's no transparency out of TikTok. We know that in China, and remember, many of the executives, most of the leadership of TikTok still sits in China, that in China, if ideas are not advantageous to the goals of the Chinese Communist Party, that they don't get distributed. I think it's profoundly distressing, the idea that TikTok can easily influence what our media environment is. And before you take a moment and say, isn't TikTok just about funny dances? A growing percentage of all Americans get their news from TikTok. It's something like 25% of people under the age of 35. And I know that sounds crazy. It's like, how can that be? But trust me, like even I've thought about doing a news digest on TikTok. We need to have transparency on these platforms. It's very doable. And one of the ways in which investors can help is by demanding for problems that we know about. And right now, my nonprofit, Beyond the Screen, is beginning a harm mapping exercise where we are in a collaborative way working on getting a single menu that is accessible by people that we can collaboratively edit, single list of harms, and a single list of ways, a comprehensive ways to move forward. Understanding like what are the levers that might prevent or mitigate harm. And we're working on producing a list of metrics that should be the bare floor for us to have transparency into these companies. It's things like what fraction of accounts that are reported for being under 13 actually get taken off the platform. How many of those accounts exist? How many kids that the platform thinks are 14 have been on the platform for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years? Facebook has that data today. I'm sure TikTok has it. We could know, and we could publish every month how many 8-year-olds are on these, or excuse me, we could know what has been the trend over the last few years of whether or not TikTok or Facebook or any other social platform has actually been complying what it says it does by keeping children off the platforms. In closing, I want to just remind you again, this isn't a conversation about censorship. There are lots and lots of ways that we can design these products to have them be safer. But as long as the only information they have to report to the public is how much money they make, how many ads get clicked on, how fast their user growth is, they're going to keep cutting corners. And I'll end you with one quick anecdote. In the last few years, we have seen tragic violence in Ethiopia that was fanned by social media. That while the civil war raged there, extensive misinformation campaigns were run, promoting the idea of that there were certain groups in society that needed to be cleansed. And huge numbers of people died, tens of thousands of people probably going to be directly attributed to Facebook's negligence with the platform. I've been told recently by people who are working to bring accountability for this issue that Facebook has cut the number of safety workers focusing on East Asia by half in the last 6 months. It makes sense. This is their year of efficiency. Safety is a cost center. And they know that over at least the short term, especially if they don't have to tell you how many people actually support each language, or even which languages they have safety systems for. They don't have safety systems for most of the languages spoken in Ethiopia, that no one can call them out. And so we need the investor community to come in and say, hey, we think there's a systemic risk here. Without data, we can't assess whether or not your company is vulnerable. We've seen Facebook have the largest single-day drop in value twice in the last 5 years. And that's because when the lies come out, and eventually they will, the stock price goes down. Lies are liabilities. Transparency can help all companies be healthier and happier in the long run. So thank you so much.